Aubrey Manaka has pleaded guilty to raping and murdering the college student Precious Ramabulana. Sentencing proceedings are expected to begin this morning at the Limpopo High Court. Manaka telling the court that his intention was to propose love to her, but he ended up breaking into her student residence, stabbing her multiple times and raping her. This morning we find out more about the mind of this particular person. And we speak now to forensic psychologist Dr. Gerard Labuschagne with his 14-plus years at the South African Police Service as a profiler. Doc, a very good morning to you. Thank you once again for making time to talk to us. Just listening to this introduction about what the intentions of this person were, who says he saw her once and he immediately developed feelings for her, but was simply too afraid to approach her in order to propose love, and therefore the best way that he saw fit was to stab her, rape her, and basically kill her. How do you even begin to assess the mind of a person like this?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously, I didn't personally assess him, so I can really only kind of reflect on similar cases I've dealt with, specifically when I was in the police. And, you know, we always say that rape it's not about a sexual arousal act. It's about power and control and very often anger. And kind of what was described here by himself sort of seems to fit in with that. We also have, of course, if I understand correctly, on the day there were substances involved. Yeah. Now, we don't blame substances for what he did, but obviously substances become a disinhibitor for your behavior and allow you to do things that you might perhaps not have normally done at that particular point in time. But I mean, we see, for example, I mean, she was stabbed, if I understand correctly, about 52 times. You know, we did some research on stab wounds on female victims specifically, and the average number is 6.9 stab wounds. So you're talking about a massive amount of overkill. And very often overkill can indicate that there was some presence of a history between the two people. So we'll see that a lot in your domestic violence, intimate partner murders, with this explosion of anger from the history. But again, we have to be cautious. We can't always apply that automatically to any case that there was any contact between these two people. And when you throw substances in, of course, you can get a lot of behavior that you might not have expected if the person wasn't under substances. But the main thing here would have been driving this issue of power. He seems to kind of fit in with what we call a power assertive rapist who feels it's their right or entitlement that you could respond positively to their advances. So I think for future, obviously I would be very concerned about such an individual being released out on parole. Very interesting to see, does he have any history of sex offense behavior or even arrests? Those wouldn't have been mentioned at this point in time because prior to your guilty verdict, that's not allowed to be introduced to the court. So very interesting. It's sentencing, whether they do pop up with any previous convictions. It wouldn't surprise me. 29-year-old person with this kind of behavior, it wouldn't surprise me if there was some inappropriate sexual behavior history.
Well, you talk about that, Dr. Labuschagne, and our colleague in Limpopo did mention this, that there is a 4-year-old who was allegedly raped by the same man, but this case could possibly have been bungled by the prosecutors. That also on its own, because we know now what happened to Precious Ramabulana, among the things that he did to her was to rape her. The 4-year-old was also allegedly raped. So is it fair to immediately categorize him or classify him as a serial rapist who has now added to his series of criminal acts by committing murder?
So obviously not being convicted for that, it makes it difficult to say, you can't say with any certainty that he is the offender. But normally if someone is convicted of 2 separate incidences of rape, we would call them a serial rapist. And if, like we have in this case, where number 2, for example, included murder, you know, we'll be very concerned that this is going to become a serial murder pattern of behavior. So that will be very concerning. And of course, whenever a person targets someone who's sort of generally 13 years or younger for sexual behavior, one also has to throw in the considerations, are we potentially dealing with a pedophile? So those will be a lot of the things that a proper risk assessment that hopefully would be done when we deal with sentencing would address those kind of issues. But if I was still in the police, what we would definitely be doing is looking for other cases in that area that could match up to someone of his modus operandi, checking, of course, DNA, see if it matches any other cases. We've sometimes had incidences where a suspect pleads very quickly to a rape and a murder case or a rape case, hoping that therefore the DNA wouldn't be processed, because once the DNA is processed, of course, you might find out that this DNA matches 3 or 4 other cases that are sitting on the DNA database. So definitely, I think from a policing point of view, this shouldn't be the end of it. This should be the start of them looking to see if he's responsible for other cases.
Yeah. Is it possible, Dr. Labuschagne, to rehabilitate a person like this, person who sees someone for the first time, develops feelings, but is simply not brave enough to approach them, to propose love, and your first instinct is to basically just exert power over this person?
Of course, one would be very concerned about any sexual offender is high risk for reoffending. We also don't really, and of course, once you bring sexual offense and murder into it, you're dealing with an incredibly dangerous type of individual. We don't ultimately understand what makes one person become that way. So then, of course, the question is, how do we fix that person? So I think, if you've mixed that sex and violence link, it's incredibly concerning for reoffending behavior. You'd hopefully have to have a proper risk assessment done of this individual when he reaches correctional services, in addition to the one during the sentencing phase, that they can try and address whatever risk factors he has, because we must accept that even if you have a life sentence, the potential for coming out on parole would normally start at around 25 years, where you would be eligible for hearings to determine your fitness for parole. So no offender is going to probably ever stay the rest of their life in jail. So we really do need to start to look at it. What are the risk factors? What can we do? And of course, we have to accept that for certain individuals who commit incredibly violent acts and repeat violent acts, we do have to just accept that sometimes it's just not worth the risk to society to let those types of individuals back into society.
Doctor, how much responsibility, or should the state take responsibility for possibly allowing this person to be in the streets, given the case of the 4-year-old, which remains unresolved? And so I guess that remains an allegation against him. But had that case been followed through properly, in all probability, this person, one, would have been added to the sex offenders list and probably jailed, had it been done properly.
Well, of course, if you are found guilty of raping a minor, the automatic starting point for your sentencing is a life sentence. So yes, one can argue if he had been convicted, and this was prior to Precious's incident, he would have been therefore in jail for at least 25 years, if not longer, which is obviously keeping society safe. In general, rape cases there was a very good national study done by, amongst others, the Medical Research Council, which looked at from the moment a rape case is opened up until the point where it drops out of the system, whether it be through withdrawal or not conviction or not charging, etc. And if I recall correctly, it's definitely under 10% of cases that get reported to the police ever end up in a conviction. So the attrition rate of rape cases is just shocking. And the chance of getting convictions, like I said, is over 90% that you won't get a conviction in a case that's opened up. And there's various factors in that study that kind of influence either way. Of course, child victims, it gets a bit more difficult. The child has to be able to adequately testify. Your forensic evidence becomes essential, because if someone's semen is found inside a minor child, well, that's almost automatically evidence of a crime, where in an adult it's not automatically evidence of a crime. So definitely forensic evidence would have been key, and I would be surprised if there was forensic evidence like DNA and they still didn't charge him. I'd be very curious why that took place. So is it worth it while that we ask questions? Absolutely. And I always say we don't know why someone becomes a serial rapist or a serial murderer, but we know who allows them to. And, of course, that's ineffective policing. If you caught all your rapists and murderers after the first rape and murder, they would be in jail and not able to commit further acts. So the more serials you have in your country and the higher their victim count gets, it's actually a commentary on the quality of your, at least, sexual offenses policing.
Yeah. Professor of Forensic Medicine and Forensic Psychologist, Dr. Gerard Labuschagne, thank you very much for your time and insights.